warm and welcoming MC I have ever met, and I would like to start by asking you to help me to thank the center for putting this amazing program together. And I'm really happy that I'm the first speaker after that delicious meal, so we're all kind of satisfied and we can all relax. And I'm going to be giving you a rather low-tech presentation compared to all of the incredible PowerPoints that we have seen so far. I'm honored to be here in my role as Special Assistant on Immigrant and Intercultural Affairs for Queens Borough President Helen Marshall. The Borough President is a proud alumna of Queens College, and over the past decade, she has allocated significant funding to this dynamic institution. I'm also honored to be the one speaker on tonight's roster to address the topic of diversity innovation in government. There could be no better place to discuss this topic than right here in Queens, the most multi-ethnic county in the United States, and a model for what the nation as a whole will look like in a matter of decades. As Borough President Marshall says, you visit Queens and you see the world. Let me start by sharing my conclusion, which is that government should play a vital role in multicultural community building efforts. Our city's political leaders already embrace cultural diversity work in many important ways. For instance, they provide financial support to intergroup relations projects. They hold solidarity rallies with the victims of hate crimes, and they sponsor legislation for anti-bias curriculum in the schools. But I would venture to say that Helen Marshall is the only elected official who has made cross-cultural understanding such a priority area in her administration, and who has designated staff members to develop and run initiatives that advance immigrant integration as well as multicultural civic engagement. I'm one of those designated staff members, and my work for the Borough President has been extremely rewarding. My sense is that the Borough President's office is uniquely positioned to promote cultural diversity. We're the only ones who maintain a borough-wide focus. We're privileged to have access to many constituencies, and we can give a kind of official welcome to emerging communities, affirming that they are an integral part of the civic life of Queens. We can also be, in the words of one local Muslim activist who's in the room tonight, a neutralizing force among individuals or groups with divergent views. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the spirit of the center, I would like to tell you a little bit about me and how I came to do multicultural work in a government setting. As Sophia said, I grew up in Jackson Heights. It was during the 1970s when, believe it or not, Jackson Heights was a predominantly white neighborhood. The local synagogue was like my second home. But my daily reality actually looked quite different. My mother, a Holocaust refugee who attended a segregated school in Nazi Germany, sent me to the United Nations International School. So from kindergarten through the 12th grade, my classmates and teachers were of many nationalities and faiths. We appreciated each other first and foremost as individuals, and we understood that our cultures and religions informed and enriched our lives. In a way, my story is the opposite of many people's awakenings. It was when I went off to college that I became more aware of the discrimination in America, which has produced inexcusable inequalities and which diminishes us collectively. So imagine my surprise when I returned to Jackson Heights in 1987 and found that my neighborhood had come to look like the United Nations. I didn't know yet about the 1965 Federal Immigration and Nationality Act, which largely accounted for the demographic changes, but I felt like I had truly come home, and I have stayed here ever since. Through my studies, my activism, and my professional work, I've been able to participate in the transitions taking place in our changing communities. I came to Queens College to earn a master's degree in urban studies, and I studied with anthropologist Roger Sanjak, the author of The Future of Us All, Race and Neighborhood Politics in New York City. If you haven't read The Future of Us All, which is about the interactions between longtime residents and recent immigrants in Elmhurst and Corona, you really should. The book provides a very useful framework for understanding how people build relationships around shared concerns in their multicultural neighborhoods. Helen Marshall is one of the leaders described in the book. The daughter of Guyanese immigrants, she was raised in the Bronx and attended programs at a Jewish settlement house. She and her husband moved to Corona, East Elmhurst in the 1950s, and she identified with the integrationists during the civil rights movement, although she also had a very close relationship with Malcolm X, who lived in her neighborhood at the time. During the 1980s and 1990s, serving in the State Assembly and the City Council, she proudly represented a district that she referred to as the epicenter of immigration. Helen Marshall was familiar with my local arts and youth empowerment work at the Jackson Heights Community Development Corporation. And when she was elected borough president, she hired me to join her staff. Borough President Marshall envisioned creating a Queens General Assembly, named after the UN General Assembly, which first met in Flushing Meadows, where the Museum of Art is now. And the idea was to formalize cross-cultural understanding at the borough level. She gave me the responsibility of structuring and running it. With help from several mentors, I assembled a diverse network of civic activists from around Queens. From 2003 to 2006, from 2003 to 2006, we met on a monthly basis for conversations on what it means to be an American, for story-sharing sessions, and for discussions on how to help our communities access essential services. We also produced 2 programs that aired on Queens Public Television. In 2006, our members spoke about the Queens General Assembly to the borough's 14 community boards and offered themselves as resource people. From 2007 to 11, we partnered with several community boards on community dialogue forums, where hundreds of people who lived and worked in these districts came to the table for problem-solving discussions about neighborhood concerns. Borough President Marshall often says that we have more similarities than differences. When we start by talking about the things we have in common, we can then proceed to build relationships, learn from each other's experiences, and build coalitions to improve our communities. Our next and last project under Borough President Marshall's administration is an oral history collaboration with the Queens Memory Project at Queens Library. We also plan to produce a booklet with guidelines on how community groups can incorporate dialogues similar to ours into their work. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Borough President Marshall has launched several other initiatives that promote immigrant integration in a multicultural context. Her Immigration Task Force, which I also coordinate, is a diverse network of social service providers. We come together on a monthly basis for information exchanges, for updates on immigration policy, and for presentations from guest speakers on a wide variety of issues. We're now producing an immigrant services directory, and we're launching a speakers bureau so our members can share their expertise with groups around the borough. And this picture is a networking reception where we brought together members of the Queens General Assembly and the Immigration Task Force for a presentation by the city's demographer, Dr. Joe Salvo, who's in the front row, the first person from the right. And whenever Joe comes, he presents to us a custom-made presentation on the changing demographics of Queens based on the recent census data. 2 years ago, I convened a Queens Complete Count Committee for the Borough President, which brought together diverse leaders for strategy sessions on how to maximize response rates during the 2010 census. Although Queens ended up being undercounted, the relationships that developed on the committee led to further coalition building. And we produced a report with concrete recommendations on how the Census Bureau could establish better lines of communication with local groups in time for the next decennial census. For the past 5 years, together with a committee of Queens-based Muslim activists, some of whom are in the room, I have had the privilege of coordinating Borough President Marshall's annual Iftar program in observance of Ramadan. 300 people attend the event at the New York Hall of Science. The program includes official remarks from the Borough President and the Mayor's Immigrant Affairs Commissioner, a presentation of awards to outstanding members of the Muslim community as well as to their allies, a prayer service, and a breakfast meal. The committee members and I have become good friends, and as we organize the event, I watched them move our incredibly diverse Queens-based Muslim community toward greater unity and toward broader participation in the civic life of our multicultural borough. I have encouraged our committee members to take the next step as they look toward organizing a legislative breakfast where they can make their local elected officials more aware of their concerns about, among other things, the recent rash of violence targeting Muslim New Yorkers. These are just a few of the ways that Borough President Helen Marshall has promoted understanding and supported multicultural community building in the borough. I could imagine her next initiative, but this is just speculative, being a huge symposium, not so different from this, but maybe a round table, bringing together all the groups doing intergroup relations work in the borough to share best practices, to disseminate resources, to recommend future directions, and to identify ways that government could provide even more effective leadership. We have been blessed to have Helen Marshall setting the tone for respectful dialogue in the borough for the past decade. Hopefully the next borough president will build on the foundation that she has established so that cross-cultural understanding becomes completely integral to the work of government in Queens. We're really talking about the well-being of our democracy and about the potential for creating a transformative multicultural future. There's a lot more work to be done, and I'm excited to do this work with you. Thanks.
All right, our next speaker is Professor Mark Rosenblum from Queens College. I see there's a few of you who know this mysterious Professor Rosenblum. So I first met Mark when I was a graduate student at the graduate program in international affairs at the New School, and he was teaching at Queens College but happened to be a visiting professor that semester. At the New School, I was all set to study microeconomics and Latin America, and then I met Mark. So Mark was co-teaching a special class in which all of us would play Israeli and Palestinian negotiators. Behind the scenes, out of the eye of the camera, we would all try to come to a secret peace agreement that would end up being a final resolution to all issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Much to my Guatemalan father's chagrin, there went Latin American studies. And I became immersed in the topic of Israel-Palestine, and also inspired by Mark to start a foray into the realm of experiential education, creating simulations, games, and role plays and other exercises. So this is completely not all about me. I'm giving this example by way of saying that this is actually a completely ununique thing for Mark. He inspires pretty much everybody he meets in this way. There is something that is really profound about his ability to combine his two lives. One in which he is actually a negotiator in track 2 negotiations on the ground in Israel and Palestine, and one in which he is a highly respected and beloved professor who utilizes creative techniques to help his students understand that the Middle East, or as he likes to say, the Muddle East, is three-dimensional and messy and a very difficult and heartfelt topic for pretty much all of us. Mark has a rare ability in this endeavor and in his endeavors as the director of the Center for Ethnic, Racial, and Religious Understanding to inspire his students to make what I'm starting to call the calculated leap. Due to his efforts and teaching techniques, students are brave enough to start to confront and investigate narratives of conflict that perhaps they did not want to consider before. Not only that, the students most often take the leap, putting themselves into the shoes of people with opposing or unfamiliar narratives, and even finding empathy and some understanding. And so here, to discuss breakthrough, not breakdown, a new model for teaching the Middle East. Please welcome Professor Mark Rosenblatt.
I've just come back from the Middle East in the last 24 hours, and I've been reminded that a seemingly intractable and violent conflict, particularly the one between the Israelis and the Palestinians, seems to have generated almost to an art form, gallows humor. And I wanted to start with an example of this gallows humor to make an initial point. And it's a story about a priest, a minister, an imam, and a rabbi. It's a joke that first made the rounds about 4 years ago, and it's been recycled again. And it's apparently got a strong shelf life. The story starts with a very intense and edifying evening and a theological discussion about death between a priest, a minister, a rabbi, and an imam. And the rabbi is a little bit anxious because he wants to get down to something more earthy, less academic, and wants his fellow clerics to be able to answer the question what they want to have said about them at their funeral. And the first one to jump in is the priest, and the priest says that, I hope people will say that I was a fair and honest guide in helping overcome the scandals that exist in the Catholic Church. The minister said, well, when I die, I hope people will say that I saved many souls by bringing them closer to Christ. The imam suggested that his death is going to have to be accompanied by a longer speech because his religion is so profoundly misunderstood in America. And he said they'd have to, I hope, say that I was honoring the 5 pillars of my religion, that I actually taught about Islam not as part of a clash of civilizations, but as a religion and as a culture that's stretching out to have a meeting of the minds. He turned then to the rabbi and said, well, Rabbi, what would you like to be said about you when you die? And without missing a beat, the rabbi said, look, he's breathing. Now, the truth is that I'm not going to stand here today and talk about we can jilt the Grim Reaper, but certainly the story is, can one teach about the Middle East and even think about resolving some of its core issues in a way that brings fresh breath into it? And I want to start by, if I get my clicker here, this is obviously going to slow me down. Get beyond this. So, as you can see, I've aged, I'm a grandfather, and it's changed my reading habits. And I now read, of course, children's books for Chloe, who's 5, and Bogey, who's 2. They're very advanced in terms of their passion and their capacity with language. And Dr. Seuss has become one of their favorites. And this, I thought, was an appropriate way of thinking about the Middle East, and particularly the Israeli-Palestinian dimension of the conflict. And as the story says, you all are familiar with the cat in the hat, I hope. And this mess is so big, so deep, and so tall, we cannot pick it up. There is no way at all. But the truth is, what this is a story about is a cat in the hat who is a party maker, a house wrecker, and a cleaner-upper, all in the same time. Sally and her brother are stuck inside in a rainy day, nothing to do, and the cat in the hat comes and entertains them and takes the house apart, and it's littered, and the mother's going to be home any minute. But after he destroys a chunk of the house, and the fish is pleading for its life and isn't enjoying this whole episode, it turns out that this guy, the cat in the hat, turns out to be a deus ex machina, the external force that actually not only makes fun and breaks things up, but he makes everything clean. The tragedy is that the great man or woman theory of history does not have a cat in the hat. We don't have happy endings there with someone that can come and entertain, be a party animal, and then clean up the mess with a happy ending. Sometimes we hear about Sadat, and we hear about Rabin as one of those historical figures that shocked people into doing things that they thought were impossible in some healing process. But neither of their lives ended well. And the truth is that they're very problematic when you examine closely. The icon was tainted. So I'm not going to focus on how we try and get to understand the Middle East mess and try and teach it in a new way that gets people more insightful. I'm rather going to focus first on, I think, one of a dozen or so distinguishing characteristics of the new model we've been trying to create here at Queens College. And I do mean we, a team effort with a half a dozen people, many of them with talents and gifts and insights much greater than my own. And if you want to have impact, you have to work in team. And so it's the creating of diversity in creating a learning community. The learning community that we've created has 5 different dimensions to it. First, we've got a group of very diverse students from all different ethnic, racial, national groups, and those students are the centerpiece as undergraduates and part of our learning community. But they're then supplemented by some senior citizens that have unique biographies that add immeasurably to the ideological and generational exchange that takes place in this learning community, sitting in the classroom with people that are 18, 19, 20, 21. For example, we had in this learning community a number of people who came and survived Auschwitz that were sitting in the course. It wasn't some distant memory. People talked quite vividly and passionately about their experience in one of those traumatic moments in history. We also had several Christian women whose fathers served in the SS and were Nazis and were sitting in our class. We also had several Palestinian Arabs who were from places in Israel like Jaffa that they ended up having to leave, and they talked with great passion about this. So we have this incredible storytelling that's taking place by people that experiencing things that are not from pages in books, but visceral experiences of people that are still alive, coherent, and testifying for history about what they experienced. The third part of the learning community had to do with teachers. We actually brought in teachers from 10 different high schools that were teaching and were mandated to teach about the Middle East, and they were pulling out their hair. How do they teach this without having the parents of their kids that often come from diaspora communities, Israeli mothers and fathers, Palestinian and Muslim mothers and fathers, people that have real connectivity to the Middle East, and the teachers were frightened they would misstep. They would do something that would get them in trouble, perhaps even threaten a career. So we had high school teachers in the class, a class taught in the late afternoon every Tuesday for 3 hours, and then 6 times in the semester, they stayed for 5 hours together and tried to design curriculum that was age grade relevant for their high school students. The fourth part of our learning community involved high school students, mostly from the adjoining high school here that's right on the edge of our campus. And these were almost all honor high school students, and they represent the same kind of diversity ethnically, religiously, and nationally. And last but not least, the fifth dimension of this learning community were people from the Middle East. We brought in diplomats, negotiators, scholars, grassroots activists, military leaders, all trying to bring to our class a sense of traffic from the Middle East that would visit us in a way that would be helpful as a learning community. Whoops, it's going the wrong way, and it should be going the other way because I'm holding it upside down. So you can see I'm teaching upside down. The 3 R's, some historical periodization. The class and the structure of trying to make it anew and learn the Middle East in a different way is dividing it into looking at conflicts like the Arab-Israeli conflict in a triad. We have roots of the conflict, and they're contested. We have renovations or major moments of historical change, and those are contested. And then we have would-be resolutions, or we could also have the possibility of irresolution. We know in many conflicts in the world, in particular in the Middle East, we have sometimes people, national leaders, and nations themselves that are resolutely irresolved, and there's no resolution. So not every attempt to mediate a conflict and transform it works. In fact, it's littered with a lot of failures. Now, the next two I'm going to go through very quickly so I don't use up the nice reading by keeping you here to breakfast. Choosing between the bad and the terrible. The nature of dilemmas in the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is so bad that it's been not just a question of bad and worse, or even between bad and terrible. The choices sometimes come down to cholera and the plague. And how do you motivate people where the dilemmas are so profound and the choice is so troubling? How do you energize and mobilize people for something that's hardly a clear good choice over a decisively bad choice? People get de-energized and demobilized when they say, well, there's not a big hooray here, there's sort of an oy vey here. And how do you get people to move and be energized in this kind of environment? I want to face these dilemmas in a very serious way. Palestinians are stuck in this kind of perhaps cholera and plague choice, just as are Israelis. Just to give you a quick example of this. The Israelis have two lobes of their brain that are deeply divided when it comes to imagining their existential plight, the threats they're most concerned about. One threat that's tied to Zionism and the Jewish state is the trade-off and the dilemma of having deep heritage, religious, and ideological ties to the greater land of Israel, Judea and Samaria, as it's called and biblically, or to the occupied territories, as other people would refer to it. And by the way, about a half of all Israelis use the term occupied territories. This choice of wanting the territories, but if you take the territories and annex them, you will find your appetite geographically is undermined the Jewish character of your state. And you'll have a majority of citizens that are not Jewish. A very famous general by the name of Yehoshua Rakabi, hardly a household word, once came up with a pithy insight, a sound bite that he suggested was really a sound policy. Unless Israel helps birth a Palestinian state, it shall become the Palestinian state. So this choice in Israel is, gee, we have to get out of territory to not end up undermining the Jewish character of the state of Israel and Jewish demographic majority. But in getting out of these territories, like in Gaza, they discovered curved trajectory weapons, rockets, missiles, and mortars were raining down on them. So do they get out of territories to survive and keep their Jewish state, or do they get out of the territories to preserve the Jewish demography, but then do not have protection? Israel is not, in spite of everything you've heard, controlling the skies with these magical anti-missile systems, the most famous of which is the Iron Dome. The Israelis have a profound dilemma here in making choices. The Palestinians also have profound dilemmas they're conscious, aware. That is, on one hand, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is told, you are the interlocutor. But we notice you can't speak, and the state you just got is for the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, you think, but you don't control Gaza. So you're not an interlocutor. You're not a negotiating partner that can talk about representing Palestinians in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And therefore, you better think about how you reunite these two territories. And so the Palestinian Authority and the PLO thinks about how to reunite Gaza and the West Bank. They think about reconciling with Hamas. And then the Israeli government and the Americans say, and some Europeans, well, if you reunite with Hamas under the current circumstances, given who their leaders are and what their politics are, you delegitimate yourself in the PLO and the West Bank by getting in bed with terrorists, and you become a terrorist. Palestinians are caught between a rock and a hard place. Profound dilemmas. You also have the dilemma, if you look at the map, and I think it's right side up, the four-state de facto reality. If you look at this map, there's a striking thing that you would see. And if you thought about it for 2 minutes, I've already referred to there being two Palestinian entities, would-be states, one in Hamas, of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and the other under the PLO, the Palestinian Authority dominated by Fatah in the West Bank. There are two Palestinian would-be states. And if you look closely at Israel, you can make a case with some exaggeration. There is the internationally recognized state of Israel within the pre-1967 boundaries, but they also have a beginning of a runaway settler movement in the West Bank that some significant young people, powerful well beyond their numbers, no longer recognize the Jewish state of Israel's authority, either in the Knesset or the Prime Minister. They march to a higher drummer. So if you're for a two-state solution, my point is very simple. You have to face the fact, as Leo DeRocher would say, you've got to go from the four-state de facto reality to the two states you want, a state of Palestine and a state of Israel. This is not just an uphill battle, it's an up-mountain battle. Understand the barriers that stand in the way of your goals, and there's an international consensus now that the goal for nearly a decade has been a two-state solution, yet there are deep, entrenched problems. Very quickly, we have something that happened to me about 7 years ago, taking one of my many missions over to Syria. And I had a very, very wealthy business person who had a lot of money to spend on rugs and was very well informed. And on the way out, with his 9 rugs that are going to be shipped back to America for $40,000 or $50,000, he saw one that caught his eye as he was leaving this rug store in Damascus. And truth be told, you see, says, if you read fine print, the rug seller in this photo is actually from Dubai, not Damascus. I couldn't not tell you the truth here. But what happened is that as this person is leaving, he loved this other rug out of the corner of his eye, and half of it was showing he bought it. He took it home and he unfolded it, and the gorgeous pattern gave way to a portrait woven into the rug of Hanan Ashrawi, a famous Palestinian spokesperson. Not exactly what he wanted to have on his floor. And don't buy or sell half a rug. The metaphor here, the anecdote here is so much of the thinking about the Middle East has to do with narratives that are half truth, half false, and that passes as if it's serious historiography. It's not. Narratives are what we all end up spewing, and if you're in a diaspora community that's caught in a crisis or a war, what do you end up doing? Feeling compelled to identify with your side and fight the war from the safety of the United States in the media, and make sure that your side is seen as an innocent victim and the other side as a vile perpetrator. We're basically looking at partial realities. The struggle for a new educational system on the Middle East is to see the full rug and understand you have to therefore master the next quick. And I apologize to my Muslim and Jewish friends in the audience that the Grimm fairy tales and the 3 little piggies, it's not exactly kosher, I understand, but this makes my point. What we do in the class that helps distinguish it from other ways of thinking about the Middle East, not only do you have to see the full rug and understand the other, you also have to build the most compelling house of the other side. Don't straw man. Don't build a house of straw that the big bad wolf can easily blow over. Don't build a house of wood. Build the most compelling case for the pains and claims of the other. So at least you're getting a sense of the other side's woven fabric that's in the rug. And so the students that take our courses are all challenged to understand the other by building the most compelling, not the most repelling case in terms of the other's pains and claims, their goals and their values. And here we have perhaps the most important element that brings together some of the 3 last slides I talked about. The central requirement of every student in the class after a brief 20-minute survey that is meant to reveal their bias, their community of commitment, which side in the conflict they identify with, and which side in the conflict they know little about and little sympathy for. And at that moment, after the students have revealed what their own community of commitment is, which side they identify with, they have to spend the entire rest of the course engaged in an exercise of mastering the other side. And we have 4 or 5 variations of this walk on the other side shoes. From first, building the best case statement and narrative that you can. A whole course where you spend time studying with people from the other side that come from the Middle East, that give you some sense of the best narrative the other side has, and you write a compelling essay. You're a lawyer for the other side, the most compelling case statement. We also have, thanks to Sophia, who's one of the team, one of the people that I learned from, one of the people that has the skill set and the knowledge base that I'm learning from her about, is someone that's a master at designing and implementing simulations. And there are two kinds of simulations that we ourselves, I think, have mastered and constructed as a way of learning about the Middle East in a unique way. One is to look back at a decisive historical moment. For example, the roots in the 3 R's of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the root moments would be the 1947 United Nations Special Committee on Palestine that went to the Middle East to figure out how can we somehow do a Solomonic compromise. What do these parties want? And we revisited that, and the students who identified with Israel and Zionism had to play the role of Palestinians and those that were against the founding of the Jewish state. And we had the Jews that had to play the role of the Palestinians and others that were against the Zionists. So we had people switching sides and role-playing. The other is an interesting fast forward, not revisiting a great historical moment, but anticipating a big historical moment, like a real-time negotiation, a secret negotiation in late success, just up the road, where we create a framework for a would-be serious breakthrough in negotiations. The students study with real Palestinian, real Israeli, and real American negotiators, study with them for 6 weeks, and then they get cast in the role of playing the other side in this simulation.